Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 489. A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with A Better Path. Here, I look at ways to avoid being taken advantage of or being targeted by a scam. Then I look at ways we could improve our lives. Then it's on to A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. This book deals with the history of the United States as told from the perspective of blacks, immigrants, and poor people, well, and others, wealthy people too. But it puts everybody in perspective, and each group, in a sense, gets a chance to tell their story. Today's show will feature background footage from Florence Nature Preserve. Florence Nature Preserve is located in Girton, North Carolina. To get there from Asheville, North Carolina, take Highway 74A East. Go past Fairview. You'll go over the Hickory Nut Gap, crossing into Henderson County. Well, maybe 2 or 3 miles past this, as you're going down the mountain, you'll see some ruins of an old stone house on the left. You can see mainly the chimney. There's a little parking lot here, so you park here, and the trailhead is located near the ruins. However, I approached this trail from a different way, which was a little unorthodox and included some off-trail hiking. So now, let's continue. Well, I forgot to tell you, this is Squeaks I got with me. Anyway, so now, let's continue with A Better Path. Once you realize what's going on, you could correct it and get rid of the curse. And that applies to many situations besides just curses. Once you realize what's going on, a lot of times you could correct your failings without help from others. You just have to know where you went wrong and why, and how to correct it. You have to think about these things. These things are very important. Sure. Well, there's other scams too. Even artificial intelligence might come into play, somehow ripping you off. Perhaps scammers using AI programs to, rip you off, to fleece you out of money, perhaps making you donate to charities that don't exist, or other situations. Oh, scammers are very clever. They could say a virus has infected your computer and you have to pay them to remove it. And so on and so on. Well, now you got artificial intelligence behind all this. You put artificial intelligence in the hands of a sophisticated scammer with lots of resources, and who knows what might happen. It might be a little frightening or devastating. We have to be careful here. But there could be some scams in the future involving artificial intelligence. Okay, well, now let's go to the next section of the show. We're done with how people are going to take advantage of you. Now let's see how you could improve your situation. Well, you could improve your situations in many ways. First, you got to avoid being scammed and avoid people taking advantage of you. Once you got that taken care of, well, you can move on to, well, educating yourself if you feel you need it. Doing research. Well, you could do research on ways to avoid being scammed, but also research to further your financial and personal goals, your career goals. Yes, you could do it. Between education and research, you should be able to figure it out and move in to a professional field of your choice. You have to be optimistic and assume you could do it. Confidence is competence. That's an old saying of mine. So if you're confident that you could do it, if you feel you can, well, you might become competent, become able to do it. And just assuming you could do things, well, sometimes that puts you a long way towards being able to do them. Sure. So you just gotta be optimistic and hope for the best. So you move on, trying to improve your situations. Well, you could improve your situation through diet, through eating the right foods. There's so many wrong foods. Foods that are genetically modified. Foods with too much salt, sugar, and fat. And perhaps too many pesticides, or even lead or other heavy metals. It's getting worse and worse. We really need to be on our toes. We have to figure out how to deal with this situation. And hopefully things will improve once we improve our diet, once we really evaluate what we're eating. Well, some people need more improvement than others. I'm probably one of those people who, quote, need more improvement than others. Sure. As they go off to fast food restaurants. Well, that ain't good for me, but the food's still good. They say the average American eats a credit card of plastic a week. Well, knowing me, I probably eat more than that. So we have to improve our diet. And we have to get our exercise in. Different kinds of exercise. Running, weightlifting, hiking, sure, push-ups, sit-ups, leg lifts, whatever. The leg lifts. You lay on your back on a flat surface. Then, holding your legs together, you lift them about 6 inches or so above the ground and hold them there. Usually the height where it hurts the most is the height where you want it. So you hold it there for however long you can stand it, hopefully 30 seconds if you're lucky, maybe spreading your legs apart and bringing them together once or twice during this process. And do a few repetitions. a few repetitions of push-ups, sit-ups, and other things. You could do it. It helps with your circulation, with your blood pressure and blood sugar, with your cholesterol and other things. Exercise could do a lot. It could help with your mental state. It could help with many things. So, that's a good way to improve your situation. So you have to improve your situation in many ways. And there's many other ways to improve your situation too. You just got to think about it. Perhaps taking up a new hobby. Who knows? So between avoiding people taking advantage of you and improving your situation, well, you could be on a better path. Now, it is time for a people's history of the United States by Howard Zinn. Here, the author looks at the history of the United States, but in terms of its various people, each group having its story told. The blacks, the immigrants, the poor people, and the wealthy. How did they all interact with each other? And how did we come, well, to where we are today? Well, I guess it's best to just dive in. So now, let's go to page 21 of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. So, Columbus and his successors were not coming into an empty wilderness, but into a world which in some places was as densely populated as Europe itself, where the culture was complex, where human relations were more egalitarian than in Europe, and where the relations among men, women, children, and nature were more beautifully worked out than perhaps any place in the world. They were people without a written language, but with their own laws, their poetry, their history kept in memory and passed on, and an oral vocabulary more complex than Europe's, accompanied by song, dance, and ceremonial drama. They paid careful attention to the development of personality, intensity of will, independence and flexibility, passion and potency, to their partnership with one another and with nature. Now, let's go to page 25 of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. If you were a colonist, you knew that your technology was superior to the Indians. You knew that you were civilized, and they were savages. But your superior technology had proved insufficient to extract anything. The Indians, keeping to themselves, laughed at your superior methods and lived from the land more abundantly and with less labor than you did. And when your own people started deserting in order to live with them, it was too much. So you killed the Indians, tortured them, burned their villages, burned their cornfields. It proved your superiority in spite of your failures. And you gave similar treatment to any of your own people who succumbed to their savage ways of life. But you still did not grow much corn. Now, let's go to page 34 And in Maryland, where slaves were about one-third of the population in 1750, slavery had been written into law since the 1660s, and statutes for controlling rebellious slaves were passed. There were cases where slave women killed their masters, sometimes by poisoning them, sometimes by burning tobacco houses and homes. Punishments ranged from whipping and branding to execution, but the trouble continued. In 1742, 7 slaves were put to death for murdering their master. Now, let's go to page 53 of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. With the problem of Indian hostility and the danger of slave revolts, the colonial elite had to consider the class anger of poor whites, servants, tenants, the city poor, the propertyless, the taxpayer, the soldier, and sailor. As the colonies passed their 100th year and went into the middle of the 1700s, as the gap between rich and poor widened, as violence and the threat of violence increased, the problem of control became more serious. What if these different despised groups, the Indian, the slaves, the poor whites, should combine, even before there were so many blacks in the 17th century? There was, as Abbott Smith put it, a lively fear that servants would join with Negroes or Indians to overcome the small number of masters. There was little chance that whites and Indians would combine in North America as they were doing in South and Central America, where the shortage of women and the use of Indians on the plantations led to daily contact. Only in Georgia and South Carolina, where white women were scarce, was there some sexual mixing of white men and Indian women. In general, the Indian had been pushed out of sight, out of touch. One fact disturbed. Whites would run off to join Indian tribes or would be captured in battle and brought up among the Indians. And when this happened, the whites, given a chance to leave, chose to stay with the Indian culture. Indians, having the choice, almost never decided to join the whites. Now, let's go to page 59. Around 1776, certain important people in the English colonies made a discovery that would prove enormously useful for the next 200 years. They found that by creating a nation, a symbol, a legal unity called the United States, they could take over land, profits, and political power from favorites of the British Empire. In the process, they could hold back a number of potential rebellions and create a consensus of popular support for the rule of a new privileged leadership. When we look at the American Revolution in this way, it was a work of genius, and the founding fathers deserve the awed tribute they have received over the centuries. They created the most effective system of national control devised in modern times and showed future generations of leaders the advantages of combining paternalism with command. starting with Bacon's rebellion in Virginia. By 1760, there had been 18 uprisings aimed at overthrowing colonial governments. There had also been 6 black rebellions from South Carolina to New York, and 40 riots of various origins. By this time also there emerged, according to Jack Green, stable, coherent, effective, and acknowledged local political and social elites. And by the 1760s, this local leadership saw the possibility of directing much of the rebellious energy against England and her local officials. It was not a conscious conspiracy, but an accumulation of tactical responses. Now, let's go to page 62. Especially in Philadelphia, according to Nash, the consciousness of the lower middle classes grew to the point where it must have caused some hard thinking, not just among the conservative loyalists sympathetic to England, but even among leaders of the Revolution. By mid-1776, laborers, artisans, and small tradesmen, employing extra-legal measures when electoral politics failed, were in clear command in Philadelphia. Helped by some middle-class leaders, Thomas Paine, Thomas Young, and others, they launched a full-scale attack on wealth and even on the right to acquire unlimited private property. During elections for the 1776 convention to frame a constitution for Pennsylvania, a private committee urged voters to oppose great and overgrown rich men. They will be too apt to be framing distinctions in society. The private committee drew up a Bill of Rights for the convention, including the statement that enormous proportion of property vested in a few individuals is dangerous to the rights and destructive of the common happiness of mankind, and therefore every free state hath a right by its laws to discourage the possession of such property. Now, let's go to page 68, continuing on to page 69 of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. Patrick Henry's oratory in Virginia pointed a way to relieve class tensions between upper and lower classes and form a bond against the British. This was to find language and inspiring to all classes, specific enough in its listing of grievances to charge people with anger against the British, vague enough to avoid class conflict among the rebels, and stirring enough to build patriotic feeling for the resistance movement. Tom Paine's Common Sense, which appeared in early 1776 and became the most popular pamphlet in the American colonies, did this. It made the first bold argument for independence in words that any fairly literate person could understand. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. Now, let's go to page 70. Continuing on to page 71. Once the revolution was underway, Paine more and more made it clear that he was not for the crowd action of lower class people like those militia who in 1779 attacked the house of James Wilson. Wilson was a revolutionary leader who opposed price controls and wanted a more conservative government than was given by the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776. Paine became an associate of one of the wealthiest men in Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, and a supporter of Morris's creation, the Bank of North America. Later, during the controversy over adopting the Constitution, Paine would once again represent urban artisans who favored a strong central government. He seemed to believe that such a government could represent some great common interest. In this sense, he lent himself perfectly to the myth of the revolution, that it was on behalf of a united people. The Declaration of Independence brought that myth to its peak of eloquence. Each harsher measure of British control, the Proclamation of 1763, not allowing colonists to settle beyond the Appalachians, the stamp tax, the Townshend taxes, including the one on tea, the stationing of troops, and the Boston Massacre, the closing of the port of Boston, and the dissolution of the Massachusetts legislature, escalated colonial rebellion to the point of revolution. The colonists had responded with the Stamp Act.
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, caseywaters2@caseywaters.com.